Engaging citizens, a game changer for development?
Danny Sriskandaraj from Civicus, thank you very much for breaking views with UNICEF. Danny, if we look at the role of civic society throughout Africa, we're seeing little seeds of protests, of participation. What is it due to and how valuable is it?
Well, I think we live in very interesting times when it comes to citizens mobilizing and organizing. Across the continent, we're seeing the state, governments, being hampered by a lack of resources, a lack of trust from the public, and businesses also, I think, don't necessarily have all of the wherewithal to make inroads in the huge social challenges that are facing many African countries. In between the state and business, we have communities, civil society, if you will, where I think we're seeing this fabulous growth of citizens coming together to tackle the social problems and the economic and other problems that face their societies. And so I think we're seeing a transformation in who's going to lead social change over the next few decades, not just in Africa, but across the world. I think the state will retreat, business will have to fundamentally transform the way it does business, but communities and civil society, I think, will play a much bigger role in shaping societies around them.
How can citizens help bring about those real fundamental changes in societies?
If you take a question like, the delivery of education services, we're seeing, just in this country, in South Africa, there's a fabulous initiative by Section 27, a very progressive NGO, to give parents in some schools in Limpopo district a mobile phone with a free text SMS number to be able to report when a teacher doesn't turn up, or when textbooks haven't been delivered, or when the toilets aren't working. And so this is citizen accountability at its best, in a way. And it leapfrogs the sort of accountability mechanisms that we've been talking about for decades, and it puts power back into the citizens' hands. And if you take something like education and the role of children here, I also think we're at the cusp of something very interesting. The world's been talking about access to education for decades, and we're almost there. The next big thing is quality of education. Now, in the past, we've only been able to measure that by surveys or academics going and doing some research. But I think that very soon we'll see feedback from students themselves, from children, feeding into, talking about their experiences and being aggregated at the national level or at the international level, to be able to give us a sense of what's going on in terms of quality of education.
So if you are encouraging and trying to nurture this kind of groundswell of citizen participation, is there a real sign of that change happening now?
I think the first thing we have to do is convince policymakers and political leaders that we're dealing with something that's unstoppable here. The move to greater openness, to transparency, to good governance cannot be stopped. You can't run closed governments anymore. You can't hide away from public accountability. And that's what we're hearing from young people all around the world. The second thing I'm noticing is where people are frustrated by the lack of responsiveness is where we see real trouble. People get their hopes up about change in policies or change in leadership. They take to the streets or they take to Twitter. But it all amounts to nothing because politicians just start to grab power and hold onto it even more tightly. And I think that's where we're seeing, and particularly in North Africa, sort of social explosions and literally violence. Hundreds of people dying because of this coming up of sort of popular uprising, a thirst for change against systems that are entrenched and want to hold on to power. And if there's one lesson we have to take from the recent events of the Arab Spring is, we have to get better at letting people air their grievances, but also respond to the desire for social change.
If we move to democracy and how citizen participation can be somewhat of a threat, perhaps, to democracy, we're seeing growing apathy. How do you square that up with formal democracy, with formal change?
I'm quite optimistic, actually, because I think there is a lot of frustration amongst young people about formal institutions of democracy, particularly elections, And I'm hopeful that this new generation, although they may be apathetic about traditional forms of democracy, are living with these tools that will transform even the very way that we do democracy. Because many of my civil society colleagues spend their lives under huge pressure and threats from people to fight for democracy between elections, to hold governments to account, to ensure that services are being delivered where they should be. And that's the sort of stuff where I see a lot of young people, particularly in this continent, are being very active.
Danny Sriskandaraj, thank you very much for breaking views with UNICEF.
Thank you.